Hi everyone, this is not just a story, this is a reckoning. A slow-burning rise told in 5 chapters where patience becomes power and silence becomes strategy. Before the clock strikes anything tonight, take a breath, settle in, and if stories of resilience, elegance, and calculated triumph move you, support this journey by liking, subscribing, and sharing the rise. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where fallen crowns are reforged and every ending is only a beginning in disguise. The year was ending the way it often did for women who gave too much to men who took everything. The city glittered in false promise, dressed in sequins and champagne bubbles, while beneath the noise, contracts, betrayals, and quiet decisions waited in the dark. She stood in a penthouse that once felt like a shared dream and now felt like a museum of borrowed futures. The windows showed fireworks rehearsing in the distance, early bursts of light that mimicked hope without committing to it. She had dressed for a celebration she would never attend, not because she expected joy, but because dignity had always been her armor. He left on New Year's Eve with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him renewal without consequence. He left with a suitcase of tailored suits, a watch she bought, and the certainty that walking away erased the past. He believed departure meant freedom, as if freedom were something you could pack and carry, as if it did not demand payment. He believed she would fold into grief, that her power was ornamental, that the systems they built together were powered by his name alone. He believed the year would crown him again. What he never understood was that she had been reading the fine print long before he reached for the door. She had been listening when he talked too much, noting when he underestimated her, documenting every time his confidence spilled secrets like loose change. While he rehearsed a future without her, she archived the truth of the present. Every email forwarded, every document saved, every signature placed with intention had been a brick laid quietly. She was not waiting to be chosen. She was preparing to choose herself. The room he abandoned carried the echoes of their ascent. It held the awards on the shelves that bore his name, the art on the walls she curated, the contracts framed as milestones. She walked through it with measured steps, touching nothing, altering nothing. This was not the moment for drama. This was the moment for clarity. She knew exactly what midnight meant. Midnight was not fireworks. Midnight was leverage. Her phone rested on the marble counter, glowing softly with confirmations, reminders, and the kind of notifications that do not ask for attention but command it. She had scheduled the end as carefully as he scheduled the beginning. Lawyers were waiting not to argue but to execute. Partners were prepared not to defend but to pivot. Accounts were aligned not to hide but to reveal. The new year would arrive with the sound of ink meeting paper. The city counted down loudly, but her mind was quiet. She remembered the years of being the strategist behind the smile, the negotiator behind the handshake, the vision behind the pitch. She remembered being introduced last, thanked briefly, dismissed politely. She remembered the nights she held the weight so he could wear the shine. Each memory hardened into resolve. This was not revenge fueled by rage. This was restoration guided by precision. As the seconds slipped, she poured herself a glass of water instead of champagne. Clarity over intoxication had always been her rule. She stood alone, not abandoned, because solitude chosen is not loneliness. It is sovereignty. She watched the clock approach its final breath and felt no sadness. She felt alignment. The year had taught her the cost of silence and she had paid it in full. Now the dividends were due. When midnight arrived, the city erupted, but her world narrowed to the gentle vibration of her phone and the certainty in her chest. Somewhere across town, signatures were being finalized, boards were being notified, and access was being recalibrated. Somewhere, truths were being released from safes and schedules were being rewritten. The year turned and with it ownership shifted. Not in theory. In law. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply breathed, knowing the first chapter of her reclamation had closed exactly as planned. The night would end soon and morning would bring consequences he never imagined. As the fireworks faded, the foundation of his freedom cracked silently beneath him, setting the stage for the unraveling to come. The break between years held, suspended, ready to open into what followed. Morning arrived without apology, carrying the clean light that exposes what night tried to soften. She woke early, not from anxiety but from momentum. The new year did not feel new in the way calendars promise novelty. It felt new in the way a locked door feels new when the key finally turns. She moved through the penthouse with purpose, not to reclaim memories but to inventory assets. Ownership was not symbolic. It was documented, verified, and enforceable. The confirmations that arrived overnight formed a quiet chorus of completion. Accounts had been secured under holding entities she controlled. Voting rights had been reassigned according to agreements he never bothered to read beyond the headlines. Intellectual property that bore his signature had been traced back to the infrastructure she built, and the clauses she insisted on during negotiations he dismissed as cautious. She had learned early that caution was simply foresight without applause. News traveled faster than truth, and truth traveled faster than he expected. By mid-morning, messages rippled through the industry. Investors recalibrated their expectations. Partners reconsidered loyalties. The narrative shifted subtly at first, like a rumor you cannot place, then decisively, like a headline you cannot ignore. He would wake to a world that no longer aligned with his assumptions. She dressed in neutral tones, a palette of control. This was not a day for spectacle. It was a day for visibility. She stepped into the boardroom that had once felt like foreign territory and now felt like inheritance. The long table reflected her image back to her, not as an accessory but as an anchor. The seats filled with faces that had watched her work for years without fully seeing her authority. Today they would. The documentation spoke for her. Numbers do not argue. Contracts do not hesitate. The structure she presented did not accuse or explain. It simply clarified. Ownership percentages realigned. Executive authority transferred. Emergency votes passed unanimously, not out of loyalty but out of inevitability. Power rarely announces itself. It arrives with receipts. Across the city, his morning unraveled differently. He would reach for his phone and find access denied where certainty once lived. He would call assistants who no longer answered, offices that no longer recognized him, partners who suddenly remembered prior commitments. The freedom he sought revealed its invoice, itemized and unforgiving. Every assumption he made became a liability he could not offset. She felt no urge to watch him fall. Her focus remained forward. The company required stabilization, the narrative required stewardship, and the people who had carried the work required acknowledgement. She authorized bonuses not as charity, but as recognition of labor long overlooked. Loyalty when respected compounds. By afternoon the press began to circle. She did not hide, nor did she boast. Statements released through counsel emphasized continuity, responsibility, and vision. The absence of his name was not an erasure. It was a correction. The market responded with cautious optimism that solidified by closing bell. Stability is seductive when chaos is expected. She returned home as the sun dipped, carrying the weight of the day lightly. The penthouse no longer felt like a borrowed stage. It felt like a command center. She removed the art that celebrated his milestones and replaced it with pieces that reflected resilience and lineage. The walls did not need to remember him to honor the future. As night approached again, the city prepared for after-parties and resolutions. She prepared for consolidation. There were more documents to finalize, more protections to erect, more truths to secure. Power reclaimed must be protected, not paraded. She understood that the next phase would test her resolve in new ways. The day closed with a sense of completion that did not require validation. She stood by the window once more, not watching fireworks but watching traffic flow, systems in motion, lives intersecting. She had stepped fully into authorship of her own story. The year had begun with abandonment and answered with ownership. The consequences would continue to unfold, and the man who left would soon understand the scale of what he lost. The break between days settled, ready to open into deeper revelations. The third day of the year carried a different weight. The kind that presses on the shoulders of those who hold authority rather than chase it. She welcomed the pressure as confirmation. Meetings filled her calendar, not to defend her position but to expand it. Expansion, she knew, was the most convincing response to doubt. She initiated audits that had been postponed for comfort, inviting transparency into corners long shielded by charm. The findings did not shock her. They validated instincts she had honed through years of careful observation. Inefficiencies traced back to ego-driven decisions. Risks traced back to shortcuts masked as confidence. Each discovery reinforced the wisdom of her timing. As reports compiled, she authorized strategic disclosures that reframed the company's history. The narrative shifted from a singular visionary to a collective architecture built by disciplined minds. Her role emerged not through self-praise but through documented impact. The industry began to recalibrate its understanding of leadership. Meanwhile, his attempts to regain footing grew more frantic. Legal filings followed, not grounded in strength but in disbelief. He contested what he once ignored, questioned what he once signed, and demanded recognition from systems that now recognized her. The courts moved methodically, indifferent to his outrage. Process favors the prepared. She did not engage emotionally. Her responses were precise, supported by precedent and proof. Each motion filed against her returned with quiet defeats that accumulated into a pattern he could not spin. The illusion of control dissolved under scrutiny. Public opinion, fickle as it is, found stability in her composure. Stories surfaced of her mentorship, her strategic patience, her refusal to be diminished. Women across the industry recognized themselves in her ascent. Representation does not require permission. It requires presence. Internally, she cultivated a culture that rewarded substance over spectacle. She restructured leadership pathways, ensuring that voices long sidelined gained influence. The company's performance reflected the shift, with productivity rising alongside morale. Success when shared multiplies. By the end of the week, his losses were no longer abstract. Properties tied to company valuations slipped from his reach. Accounts froze pending judgments. Partnerships dissolved under clauses he once dismissed as paranoia. The freedom he sought now resembled exile. She spent evenings alone by choice, grounding herself in routine. Power without self-knowledge corrodes. She read, exercised, planned. The rituals anchored her amid the acceleration of change. She knew the storm was not over. It had merely changed direction. The gap between who she was and who she had been widened into something irreversible. The year was teaching its lesson quickly, and the next phase promised exposure that would demand courage beyond calculation. The night held, poised for the revelations ahead. Exposure arrived not as scandal but as clarity. Whistleblowers, emboldened by the shift in power, brought forward information that reframed past successes. She established independent review panels, refusing to bury truths that could strengthen the future. Accountability became policy, not punishment. The findings confirmed what many suspected and few dared articulate. Success had been inflated by narratives that favored bravado over balance. Corrective measures followed swiftly. Divestments occurred where integrity had been compromised. Investments flowed into sustainable initiatives aligned with her vision. The press attempted to provoke conflict, but she offered steadiness. Her leadership style defied expectation, replacing confrontation with correction. Markets responded favorably. Trust, once restored, attracted opportunity. He faded from relevance as the weeks progressed. His name surfaced only in footnotes of legal proceedings and cautionary analyses. The industry moved on, hungry for stability and impressed by results. Legacy, she understood, is not claimed. It is observed. She expanded the company's philanthropic arm, directing resources toward education and equity. This was not image management. It was alignment. Power that does not uplift erodes from within. The initiatives created pipelines for talent that mirrored her own journey, transforming gratitude into infrastructure. Personally, she felt lighter. The absence of constant negotiation freed her creativity. Ideas once shelved emerged with vigor. She commissioned projects that blended innovation with heritage, honoring the past while building the future. As spring approached, the company announced record growth. Analysts credited strategic discipline and inclusive leadership. Awards followed, but she accepted them with restraint. Validation was welcome, not necessary. Her power no longer felt reactive. It felt rooted. The final reckoning would not be loud. It would be complete. The pause before the conclusion settled gently. The year matured, and with it her authority. The final legal matters resolved quietly, favoring preparation over posturing. Assets once contested became settled facts. The man who left on New Year's Eve receded fully into consequence, his narrative eclipsed by her impact. She marked the anniversary not with celebration but with reflection. The penthouse now displayed art commissioned from emerging Black creators, the walls alive with stories of resilience. The space had transformed as she had from borrowed to owned. Her leadership influenced policy beyond the company, shaping conversations about equity and governance. Invitations arrived from global forums seeking her perspective. She chose selectively, guarding her time as fiercely as her assets. The story of her rise circulated widely, inspiring without exaggeration. She remained grounded, aware that power is a practice, not a possession. Each decision reaffirmed her commitment to substance. As the year closed, she stood again by the window, watching the city prepare for another countdown. The memory of abandonment had lost its sting, replaced by gratitude for clarity. She had not just reclaimed what was taken. She had redefined what was possible. Midnight approached once more, but this time she did not wait for it to begin. She had already begun. The queen had risen and her dominion stood secure, not because of revenge but because of rightful ownership. The story ended not with fireworks, but with continuity, a life authored without apology.